You're listening to The Foundation of Wellness, a refreshing take on diet and lifestyle, with Jessica Dogert, a registered dietitian nutritionist, and Marisa Moon, a primal health coach.
Hey you guys, my name is Jessica and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, and you can learn all about me on my website at jessicadogert.com.
What's going on? This is Marisa Moon, and I'm a certified primal health coach and intermittent fasting instructor, and you can learn more about me on my site at marisamoon.com.
So last week, Marisa mentioned that we have this really exciting podcast party that we're throwing for our 50th episode. And it's really just going to be this miniature wellness summit. And it's going to be located in Chicago on July 14th from 1 to 4 p.m. We've secured a location. It's going to be in River North at the Artist Flats. And we really hope that you guys can save the date. We're going to be sending out some RSVPs soon. So we're just really, really excited about that. And we just want it to be something where, you know, everyone in Chicago can learn from, but also experience really cool things like a cryotherapy facial or, you know, vitamin B12 shots. So we're really, really excited about that. And we hope that you guys can save the date for July 14th.
Yeah, especially if you're in or around Chicago, you're going to want to come. It's free, and we will be announcing it on social media this week. So make sure you're following us on social media at the Foundation of Wellness podcast. Now, for today, speaking of social media, I actually found today's guest on social media because he has the best Instagram account if you care about nutrition whatsoever, which you do because you're listening to our podcast. This guy, Tyler Jean, has the best account. Tyler is, which by the way, his account, I should say, is at functional.foods on Instagram. We'll probably say that 5 more times this episode, but let me tell you a little bit about his background. He's an aspiring naturopathic doctor. He attends the National University of Medicine in Portland, Oregon, and Tyler has always been a firm believer in educating others about health. He believes that practitioners have the unique opportunity to be a teacher and a mentor that encourages others to take responsibility for themselves, for their own health. And he wants to empower patients and the general public with the knowledge necessary for living a healthy, happy, sustainable lifestyle, which he does on his Instagram account, I am telling you. And Tyler believes that we as a society are starting to move toward a more preventative and natural approach to medicine. And with the rise in chronic disease and the increased frustration that we experience as patients and the minimal treatment options we're offered, now more than ever, people are starting to get second opinions from alternative medicine practitioners. I know that's true. And while it can be easy to get caught up in the latest fads and dietary trends, when it comes to food choices, his golden principle is this: eat nutrient-dense, unprocessed foods that celebrate plant diversity, emphasize quality, and encourages a balanced, adequate, and varied diet. Boom.
I think that's something that we can all get behind. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So let's talk about what brought you to naturopathic school. And can you tell us what a naturopathic doctor is?
Yeah, absolutely. So naturopathic doctors are, so there's a 4-year schooling process. So that is a licensed profession where you can go to school for 4 years at one of the 6 accredited schools in North America. And I really would say that naturopathic doctors are experts in preventative medicine and natural healing modalities. And it's 4,100 hours of coursework, and you have to go to school in person. It's not one of these online courses, but not to be confused with some of these online certification courses that people will go through that are 200 to 300 hours, and they're calling themselves naturopaths. So there is a difference.
Wow.
Licensed medical providers, depending on the state that we practice in. I will disclaimer that there are only currently 25 states that we can practice in and actually have licensure to practice medicine. And that means to diagnose and treat disease. We can, in our scope of practice, diagnose and treat disease in terms of what we can do in terms of prescribing pharmaceuticals, or in terms of, you know, using a lot of these modalities that we have in naturopathic medicine. That is state by state. So we can talk about that a little bit later, but the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians is the governing body that oversees the naturopathic physicians. And so I found out about naturopathic medicine as soon as I graduated college, and ultimately was just on that stereotypical pre-medical route. I studied cell and molecular biology in undergrad at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I was an athlete there. I was a student athlete at the Division I level. I swam for 15 years competitively at an elite level, and it was through swimming that I had this epiphany that the food we ate really is the foundation for performance. And I had hit a plateau in my career. And so I really started to look at food as healing, food as medicine, and that whole philosophy that food is really fundamental in our day-to-day ability to perform and recover. And so that's when I went on this rabbit hole in this chase to find out what is the optimal, diet for humans, and how could I fuel myself to success and improve my performance. And so it started out of a necessity to how I could improve my performance, and then it just grew to so much more. And so ultimately decided that, I really wanted to get into something that I wholeheartedly believed in, and that was equally new and challenging. And while I have so many colleagues and friends that are in allopathic medical school and they love it, I wanted to be a part of something that was new and it was exciting, it was growing and wasn't really stagnant. And for me, naturopathic medicine was that for me. And I feel like I'm a part of this growing movement, and couldn't be happier to have chose this profession.
Awesome. You talk about, nutrition for performance, and especially, when you were younger in high school and college, you were a student athlete. So, foods that are going to help you just give you energy and help you recover quicker. I know that you've experimented with being a vegan in the past. Can you talk about that and why you're no longer a vegan?
Yeah. So when I first started my health journey, I would say it was my sophomore year of college, which was about 7 years ago. And, at the time, I ate a very standard American diet. Granted, I will say too, I was training about 27 hours a week in terms of between the pool and the weight room and stationary bike classes, so spin classes. It was very catabolic on my body, and catabolic in nature, meaning that I was really breaking my body down, tearing the body down. So it was even more important that I was focusing on recovery to help build my body back up. And so, I was eating a lot of processed carbohydrate-rich foods, lots of grains, lots of sugar. I have a huge sweet tooth. I still do to this day, but it's definitely tamed. And I've completely changed my taste buds and what I crave in a way, by changing what I eat. And so I went from eating basically a more nutrient-poor diet that was really heavily based on animal protein and refined processed carbohydrates to now I would say it's more nutrient density and really incorporating a lot more plant matter, where before the only plants that I'd really eat, or the only vegetables, was potato, sweet potato, spinach, and tomato. So, and a lot of those potatoes were in the form of French fries. So, that's great. That was the only vegetables I ate. And I remember being inspired by a friend who had recommended the book, The China Study, by Dr. Campbell. And I read that, and it really opened my mind to this, different idea that we really need to be eating a lot more plants, and that too many of us overconsume meat in this country, or animal-based product. And this was even before I started getting into the quality of the foods that we're eating. But I ultimately went within a period of 6 months vegetarian, then to vegan. And I was vegan for 18 months. And this was all while being an elite level athlete. I will tell you that I felt amazing the first 13 months, 14 months of being vegan. And I really feel like it was like this internal cleansing of all of the processed foods and lack of nourishment that I was not giving my body for so many years. So it was almost like my body was going through this like clean house process aspect, so to say. And but ultimately, I did hit a point where my body was so depleted, and I started to hit another plateau in a way where I was constantly overtrained and I could not recover. No matter how much I tried to emphasize sleep, eat the best I could, do all, the foam rolling and whatever it may be, like I just was in this perpetual state of chronic fatigue, and my times began to suffer, and I was really struggling. Um, and so the hard part for me was that I was so invested in veganism from a nutritional aspect. I will say that I did not embark on a vegan journey for animal rights and animal welfare, which I know a lot of people do in terms of veganism. For me, it was looking for nutritional superiority for my sport. And so I was, very invested in the research by Dr. Michael Greger, Dr. Campbell, and a lot of prominent figures in the plant-based vegan community. And, I really had closed my mindset up to these other opinions and beliefs of nutrition because, I was really in this, I was brainwashed in a way, I guess is a way to say it. And it was very dogmatic in that, saying that veganism is right for everybody. And I was really putting my trust in these people that they knew what was best for me when in reality they have never met me. And it took me a really long time to come around to the idea and open my mind to these other alternative, I wouldn't even say it's alternative, but to these other discussions that were happening around nutrition, and that may be more of a paleo camp and then keto on the rise and just, a more balanced omnivorous approach. And so ultimately I was like, well, you know what I'm doing right now is not working for me. And if anything, I'm getting worse. And so I slowly started to reintroduce certain foods. And this was after visiting with a naturopathic doctor. It was the first time I had seen a naturopathic doctor and working with them one-on-one, being able to have that one-on-one discussion and really for them to answer those questions that I was seeking and looking for. It kind of gave me that push and that guidance to actually start to transition and to remove certain foods, add certain foods back in. And that started with being wild fish that I started incorporating. Then it was eggs, and it kind of just continued to gradually increase. And I just noticed that I felt better. At the time too, I had been consuming so much plant matter that I was just very bloated, and I felt that my digestion was very weak, and my digestion was at a very weak place in general. I was a very anxious and a very stressed person. And so, as most people know, that there are two arms to our nervous system. That's the autonomic nervous system. You have a parasympathetic and you have a sympathetic nervous system. And that when you engender a parasympathetic state, you turn on this rest and digest pathway that you need in order to actually break down those nutrients from those foods. Because if you aren't actually digesting those foods and assimilating those nutrients, what you're actually eating doesn't really mean that much. I mean, sure, you need to eat for like the energy perspective, but in terms of extracting all those nutrients, you got to be in a parasympathetic state. So I just realized that my lifestyle was not conducive with what I was eating at the time. And props to the people that are elite athletes and they're doing vegan and it's worked for them for so long. But ultimately, what I just found out is that there's no one diet that fits all, and this important aspect of bio-individuality. So what works for me may not work for you, and what works for you may not work for someone else. And so, that was just like this aha moment that I had, and that the reality that, that life in general, when it comes to eating a healthy diet, it's all about balance. I wouldn't even say it's necessarily about moderation, but it really is about balance. And so, finding what works for you, and a lot of that is through trial and error. And for a lot of people, that's tough because they want to just be told, what do I do? But there's a lot of uncomfortableness in like having to try things out and work through different things to figure out what works for you. So with my platform, I really hope to try to share information to give people that knowledge that they can start to tease out those different intricacies and figure out what works best for them. So yeah, I would say now though, I eat more of a paleo-centric approach that is plant-based and plant-centric, but definitely incorporating some quality meats in an otherwise plant-based diet.
Wow. I will say one of your Instagram posts that I loved and I wanted to talk about, which you already touched base on, the title was Eat More Color, aka Plants. So kind of just the whole idea of bio-individuality, like whether you're vegan, keto, paleo, all diets should have one thing in common, right? And that's to make veggies the centerpiece of the plate. So let's say you're keto and, a lot of people think a keto diet is all bacon and butter, but it's really eggs and avocado, but berries and leafy greens too. So like you said, it's all about that balance and like the right foods on your plate.
Absolutely. And I think Um, keto too, it's a medical diet, and at least it was, and it's been around for over 100 years. And so we've just really, I believe in American culture, we'll take some type of study or we'll take some finding or we'll take something and we'll just extrapolate the data and we'll just go like full bore on it. Like, we just kind of, we go crazy about these things. And so is keto the next magic pill? Is it that silver bullet that everyone's looking for, especially around weight loss? I would say that keto has its time and place for sure. And I'm not discrediting any of the research, but do as many people that are doing, do they really need to be on keto? Or is this just a silver bullet, so to say, for them to lose fat quicker or to lose weight quicker? Because I would say in general, if I'm just being very generalized, that most people are on a ketogenic diet because one, it helps them lose weight faster. A lot of people are looking to lose weight. And I'm sure they do. Yes, they feel better on a ketogenic diet. And is it because you're on a ketogenic diet or you're removing a lot of the crap you were eating before? That's always a question I have, even when I'm reading studies that are talking about the therapeutic benefits of a plant-based diet, vegan diet, paleo diet, a keto diet. Is it actually including more nutrient density and actually eating these certain foods? Or is it you removing a lot of these hyperpalatable processed carbohydrates that are, loaded with refined sugar and food dyes and other food additives that just wreak havoc on our metabolism? So, I think we can all get behind that we need to eat more plants. And for every person, it needs to be, tailored to them. You can't just go from eating a diet that has maybe 6 grams of fiber to trying to eat 50 to 80 grams of fiber the next day, because you're going to blow up. You're going to feel bloated. You're going to be gassy. You're going to have a lot of discomfort. Yeah. And so you got to be gradual. And that's where I think it's so awesome to have, health coaches and other practitioners and dietitians that really understand this and can really be mentors in a way and help facilitate guidance and encouragement for patients as they're making this transition, because it's not easy, especially when you have to do it alone.
Wow. There's really so much that you can provide our listeners with on your account alone. But while we have you here, I do think it's important to kind of circle back to your vegan story, just to kind of get your perspective on the things that made you go vegan in the first place. Like, what do you think of the China study now? I've seen it debunked famously by Denise Minger and several other, ex-vegans and researchers. So I try to tell people not to be scared by the vegan propaganda into going vegan, like into being afraid of meat, but to be more aware. That's why I love your account, because your account draws so much attention to the quality really matters, how you prepare the food matters, making food from scratch matters, the source matters. So can you touch on that a little bit? Because I want our listeners to leave this episode knowing, what kind of advice you would share now.
Yeah, absolutely. I will start and say that there are certain people that can thrive on a vegan diet, and every person is different. And that's why, it's hard to say. But ultimately, if I were to have a patient come in my future practice and sit in front of me and they're like, the vegan diet is what works for me, or I really want to make, for an ethical perspective, they want the vegan diet to work for them. I want to be able to support them in the best way possible. So a lot of times too, in a vegan diet, a lot of people talk about phytic acids. They talk about these anti-nutrients that bind a lot of minerals that, maybe it is a high source of iron or calcium or zinc, but until you actually, break down those phytic acids, it's hard to actually extract those nutrients. And that's also where it's really important to have a robust digestive system. So 2 different aspects we could look at from a vegan diet is how we can optimize the nutrient absorption and nutrient profiles. And that could be through food synergy and food combining. Like, people may be aware of ascorbic acid, which is the vitamin C that you can find from citrus fruits. And pairing that with non-heme iron. There's 2 types of iron. There's heme iron, which you find in animal-based products, and there's non-heme iron, which you find in plant-based products for the most part. And heme is much more readily absorbable than its non-heme counterpart. But if you combine the ascorbic acid with non-heme iron, so like let's say you have a spinach salad, adding fresh squeezed lemon on top of that is going to boost the absorption of that. Even better, add some heme iron with that. So maybe you do a steak salad with like 4 ounces of grass-fed, grass-finished beef. That heme iron with the non-heme iron with that ascorbic acid, that's a triple whammy. You're going to just really boost the absorption of those nutrients. So thinking about how to prepare those foods, soaking and sprouting is going to help, because it's actually going to break down that bond of the phytic acid to the nutrients, so they're more accessible for the digestion tract for those people to absorb them. Then we can also focus on how do we enhance digestibility and how can we support the digestive system in general if you're looking at the person. And so there's a lot of things you could do for that too. But going back to your original question on the China study, a lot of those studies were done in vivo, but also in vitro. So they were done in cell cultures, they were done in lab studies, they were done in rats. So they're done, not in human studies. And a lot of the human studies that they were referencing in terms of the health aspects too of a vegan diet, because it was a long study that they did in China. That's where it got the name of China study. I believe it was 27-year long observational study. But a lot of these do not prove, since, they're not these randomized controlled trials, which we would consider the gold standard. So kind of like the hierarchy of empirical evidence in terms of when you're looking at what you can actually apply in terms of from the scientific literature. You have your meta-analyses, which are kind of like you take all of these randomized controlled trials and you come up with these conclusions. And I would even say stuff above that is clinical guidelines, and it's looking at those meta-analyses. And then you have your randomized control trials where you have an intervention where you're actually trying to tease out cause and effect. So if I were to trying to figure out, let's say, curcumin, which a lot of people are familiar about in terms of its anti-inflammatory benefits, it comes from turmeric. And then you're trying to think about ibuprofen, which is better in terms of an anti-inflammatory perspective. And you have to have some type of primary outcome that you're trying to measure. That could be like a laboratory value in terms of an outcome measure where it's like, let's measure C-reactive protein, which is a marker of nonspecific inflammation. You can actually tease out, have one group gets the ibuprofen, the other one gets curcumin. Let's measure the lab values. Let's compare. You can actually rule out cause and effect, which is the more potent anti-inflammatory, and also looking at, are there any adverse effects in one group versus the other, in terms of like, are the people that are taking ibuprofen getting ulcerations? Are they getting other issues that are not intended in part of the study? And so I know I've kind of just digressed a little bit, but what I'm trying to say is that a lot of these observational studies do not prove cause and effect. And so that's why a lot of people are going to discredit
them. But the example you gave is a randomized clinical trial or controlled trial, right? So the curcumin example is a randomized controlled trial.
Yeah. So So you have a randomized control trial that's typically placebo controlled. So you have a group that's getting an inert substance like a sugar pill. One could get ibuprofen and the other one could get curcumin, and you can compare all three and compare outcome measures, whatever those outcome measures may be. So that is going to prove cause and effect, and then you can extrapolate the data from there. But a lot of times we have these observational studies, which I think do give us information. We cannot discredit them. And so even though I see these studies, and you talk about the blue zones and stuff like that, which a lot of people will talk about how they eat a plant-centric diet, mostly plant-based diet, and that they're living the longest in the world. And people will be like, oh, no, you can't credit that because it's observational. There's no randomized controlled trials. But that's the thing with natural medicine too, and the field that I'm in, is that people will say, oh, there's no randomized controlled trials proving that this is effective. But it's like our ancestors and the elderly have been using these for centuries. Yeah. And, just because there isn't a randomized controlled trial showing that it is beneficial, doesn't mean that I am going to discredit, the benefits. If a patient in front of me says that I got benefits from this, I'm going to listen to that, and I'm going to weigh that more than what a study may say, no matter if it is statistically significant or not, because not all of the research is going to apply clinically in terms of a clinical application to help your patients. I think that's an important thing to remember. Just because it's statistically significant in a research article does not mean it's going to apply clinically to your patient. So it's taking all that knowledge with a grain of salt, thinking about doing, the least harm as possible when you're thinking about interventions. And if I were to try this, is this safe? What are the drawbacks of actually implementing said intervention? And so the reason why I've kind of tried to discuss this and talk about this the last 5 minutes basically is because observational studies, they generate hypotheses so that we can start, exploring more in terms of the research. But when we talk about nutrition and natural health, a lot of our funding is very limited because it's not where a lot of interests lie. And a lot of that money is going to pharmaceutical research because they have the money to fund that. And so that's just a reality. And so, keep that in mind. There are conflicts of interest. But, when I do think back of the China study, I would say that it is, I want to say it's dogmatic in a way, but not. It's a one-sided perspective. And I felt like there was an agenda to promote for sure. I did get that feeling. And when I've kind of looked back on that, and a lot of the vegan science that I've seen or that is promoted in the literature in terms of like why it's more healthy to go vegan, I would say, yeah, there is an agenda to promote. And so that's where I think it's important to look at both sides of it so that you can then, as a consumer, make that best decision for you based on what you think is best for you. Because you'll have people say that you need to go 100% plant-based and that any animal product is going to kill you. And you'll have other people say like, well, lectins, which are found in a lot of plant-based foods, are going to kill you. So don't eat plants. I'm talking about Dr. Gundry. And so it's like, yeah, so then what do I eat? And so that's what makes it so hard for people, and they're so confused. So it's like, I think there's definitely foundational principles that everyone can follow. And I just shared something yesterday on my page on like, here are general guidelines that we can all follow and that I think are applicable to anybody, regardless of what dietary camp or intricacies that you follow in terms of elimination of certain foods and stuff like that.
Why don't you go
Can you
over
walk
that?
through your different guidelines? Because I know you had at least 10 of them that you posted.
Do you have it in front of you?
I know it off the top of my head.
Okay,
so,
go for it.
So the first one is just eat whole foods, not processed food like substances. And so if I have something that I really want to share in terms of a message on my page, it's to get away from processed packaged food and a lot of these processed grain-based foods and just eat whole unadulterated foods. So what do I mean by whole unadulterated foods? If you pick something up in the grocery store and you look at it, ask, was this made from nature and taken from the land? Or was this made in a factory or in a plant, that's packaged or boxed? And if you answer that it was made by humans and it was made in a factory, then that is not real whole food. That does not mean that it does not serve a purpose at some point in your life in terms of how you eat. And you can definitely balance those in an otherwise whole food, nutrient dense diet. But we really need to create the foundation around whole food and foods that our ancestors would have recognized. And I think that's the whole approach to kind of the Paleolithic template. And so, even we talk about oils, and I know there's healthier oils and there's oils that are not so healthy and they're very refined and processed. Oils are not a whole food. And so I always like to remind people that even if we call them healthy, it's always going to be better to eat the whole food and not to substitute the oil as a healthier option. So we talk about olive oil, and people I know we'll talk about drinking literally a whole bottle of olive oil in a week because it showed in this one study that it's cardiovascular protective because of the oleocanthal, which is the active phytochemical that's found in olive oil. Well, I would much rather eat a whole jar of olives than to drink a whole, liter of olive oil. So when you eat the olives, though, you're also getting the fiber with it. You're getting the whole fruit in the way that Mother Nature intended us to consume it. So you are getting those healthy monounsaturated fats. You are getting the fiber. You are getting the phytochemicals. When we take and try to extract components of certain foods, there's always this question I have, and sure, we don't have necessarily the research for it, but it's kind of like the philosophical perspective that I come from is with anything is how would our ancestors could have consumed this? So I give the example of like everyone is on collagen and everyone loves collagen. I have no beef with collagen, but how would our ancestors, pun intended, how would our ancestors have consumed collagen? They would have, boiled down the bones and cartilaginous tissue of animal carcasses that they had hunted, and they would have drank bone broth because bone broth is rich in collagen along with so many other micronutrients and nutrients that are very, very healing to the body. Now we have these powdered collagen substances that you can buy, which, even if they are from grass-fed, they are organic, whatever it may be, it's just not the way I would want to. And, it's not the way that Mother Nature has intended us to consume it. And it's the same thing with thinking about, oils, and even a ketogenic diet, I'll say this too, is just like to hit that macro ratio of 70 to 80% fat. You have to do a lot of oils because there's no food found in nature that is exclusively fat. There's always some other macros in there, whether it be protein or carbohydrate. And so if you were to actually hit an 80 to 18, or what it's like 80, 15, 5 ratio, so 80% fats, 15% protein, 5% carbohydrates, you would not be able to hit that by just eating whole foods because your protein would be a little bit higher, your carbohydrates would be a little bit higher too. So before we had the ability to actually extract and, isolate all these oils and these different components of the food, we would not have been able to do that. So I always question that. So it's like, yes, the research on keto is so promising. People are getting benefits. There's so much validation that it works, but is this something that Mother Nature actually intended us to do? And do we know long-term, on being a long-term ketogenic diet for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, what that is going to do to our gut microbiome? What is that going to do to our biliary tree? I mean, there's so many different intricacies to it that people don't think about. And again, not discrediting any of it, but this is where it's like, stick to whole foods and try to limit the type of foods that you are getting from a bottle or a box. So I know that was the first rule, and that was kind of a tail, but yeah, just eat more whole foods. And 2 would be mostly plants. So that is kind of coming back from my perspective. And yes, we need to eat more plants, but does that mean that we need to be plant exclusive? I would say no. But again, certain people are going to thrive better off of different diets, whether that be raw or cooked, because there's a lot of people that are like raw vegan. And so, again, that's going to come back to your digestive fire, your agni from an Ayurvedic perspective, and that when you heat those foods, you're helping break down first that cellulose structure and the fiber so it's easier to digest, but you're also adding more heat to the digestive furnace so that it's easier to break down those foods and you can actually extract those nutrients and then assimilate and use those nutrients. And so, yeah, I still believe that we should be eating more plants, and that's a lot of times because there's a lot of fiber in those plants, and fiber is one of the best things you can consume if you want to help control your blood sugar and feeling satiated after a meal. And what I mean by satiated is feeling full. So many people, they know that they shouldn't be eating more frequently, but they're hungry. And so that's why they're eating typically. But, there's other aspects to it too. Sometimes we mindlessly eat as well. But when you eat a lot of fiber, it's going to help normalize blood sugar, and it's going to prevent those crashes in blood sugar, which would then signal from your brain that you are hungry and that you want to eat again. So, fiber also is so important in feeding our gut microbiome. And we're just learning more and more about the gut microbiome and how it plays such a pivotal role in our health. So again, eat more plants. You need that fiber, especially your gut bugs. 3 would be and so this is something about sugar, and this is just kind of like living a balanced lifestyle. And that I'm someone that does have a big sweet tooth, but if you want to eat sweets, get back in the kitchen and cook it yourself. If you are actually creating those recipes and you're making the donuts and the brownies from scratch, you're going to find yourself indulging a lot less often because it takes time to make those and you don't always have that time. But if you have it convenient at your local grocer and you can just pick up a brownie every day, you're going to find yourself indulging a lot more often. And when you're at home too, you can be more mindful about the ingredients.
I was wanting to ask your opinion on that one. So making sweets from scratch, I think in your house and in my house is going to look a lot different than the average person making sweets from scratch. I have a lot of family members that eat dessert every day of their life and they make it at home from scratch. But let's think about what happens when you make a batch of cookies. You have cookies for the next 3 days in your house at least.
No, I will
unless you eat them all. Yeah, so one or the other. You binge on them or you eat them because you have leftovers. So, and then B, they're using all-purpose flour, but it's organic. And they're using white sugar, but it's raw. I mean, those are kind of the things that, these are just guidelines, but I would love for you to give us your advice for everyone out there if they are going to make sweets at home.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, is the body's dynamic, and so not one thing is going to kill you, so to say. So it's, if you're thinking about the context of a otherwise whole food, plant-centric diet, if you're following those first 2 rules we just talked about, and then you're throwing in a cookie or a brownie, even if you're having 2, 3, 4, it's thinking about crowding out whatever we would, if we associate sugary desserts as bad for whatever reason, or maybe it's not bad, because I know people don't like using the morality aspect of good and bad food, but less nutritious. And so if you're otherwise, you're throwing in a cookie in an otherwise, very nutrient dense diet, I don't think it's going to play that big of a deal unless you have certain food triggers. But then again, it's like, when you're starting on a health journey, I think you do need to be more strict and follow these certain guidelines till you get to a healthy place, and then you can have more flux and you can incorporate that more into a balanced diet. But maybe you need to really put in the work for 12 weeks. You need to be really strict, and you need to, only eat, certain foods and eliminate certain foods and reduce the amount of sugar you're consuming. But once you get to that place, I think you can definitely find a good way to incorporate those and maintain a good relationship with food too. Because my goal too is I want to give people this information, but I don't want it to feel restrictive. I don't want people to feel like they can't eat certain things. And I want them to ultimately develop a good relationship with their food, but be able to enjoy foods that they do enjoy, because food, as it does nourish us, there are other aspects that people eat food for. And I think one of those important ones that a lot of people don't talk about is the communion aspect of food and bringing people together. I think that's one of my favorite ones too. And that's one of the biggest aspects of a lot of these places in the blue zones. So the blue zones are places in the world where people live the longest. They have the most centenarians, so people that live over the age of 100. And communion and community and sense of purpose and identity in the world is so prevalent in all these places. And I think that is a huge factor that a lot of us just discredit. And so many people now are isolated. They feel disconnected from society. And it's like we're more and more connected through social media, but at the same time, we're so far removed at the same time. Back to your question, what are the differences? There's definitely better and healthier ways to prepare desserts, especially if it's a cookie or a brownie or a cupcake. There's a lot of companies now that are starting to come to the market, whether that be grain-free, using unrefined, sugars, whether it be organic coconut oil or coconut sugar or maple syrup or raw local honey. They're great. I mean, sugar is sugar, but you are getting some other nutritional aspects too. And if you're loading that with some fiber, and it's less too, because when you're getting a lot of sugar from, like, let's say you pick up a chocolate cake at the grocery store, they're putting, 2-3 cups of sugar in there, where it's like just overly sweet, where you can kind of pull back in terms of how much sugar you're putting in there. And I think the fiber in there, and there's also healthier flour options too. If you're going to cook with flour, you can do a grain-free option and do the coconut flour or the almond flour, or maybe you can do a flour that's not blanched or bleached, and is not wheat containing, since there are a bunch of people that do have either non-celiac gluten sensitivity or are celiac. And that does provide a little bit more nutrient density to it. And that could be brown rice flour, it could be oat flour. But I do want to make a disclaimer that whenever you turn anything into a flour, it is going to be, it doesn't matter if it's brown rice flour, or if it's quinoa flour or chickpea flour, which they sound great, right? They're better than wheat flour. Anytime you turn anything to powder, your blood is just going to soak up that sugar. So it's going to still be insulinogenic in a way, where it's going to cause your blood sugar to bump up a little bit more and release more insulin in response to that. And why do we care about that? When we get bigger bumps in insulin, it's going to promote more fat storage. And so a lot of people don't want that. And so again, you got to find that balance. And so I don't want it to feel like people feel deprived. And so that's why I made it as a generalized guideline that, sure, if you make it, you can enjoy it, but there's definitely healthier and better ways to do it. And even stuff like monk fruit and stevia, you can do it, sugar-free. So there's so much you can do with that. But I think in terms of the guidelines, I just didn't want people to feel restricted, that they can enjoy some of those sugary sweets that they really enjoy.
Which we are going to link to your account. Every post that we mention in this podcast, everyone can see in the show notes. So you can see, we'll link to some dessert ideas he shares. He shares all different, everything from recipes to these like charts and infographics that he creates, including this list he's going over now. So we will definitely send you there, because that's where your answers are going to be. So go ahead. Sorry, number 4.
Yeah, so drink water. There's so many fun, and I would say they are fun, elixirs and beverages on the market nowadays. And you have stuff like, organic energy drinks that use stevia and monk fruit. And you have these coconut milk elixirs with adaptogens and all these potions in them. And, it sounds really enticing. It sounds really fun. You got collagen drinks now. You got bone broth, all these great things. But when it comes back to what should I drink, I think you got to start with the foundations, and that's water. I mean, there is no other fluid other than water that is needed for human survival. Like, we all need water. So while bone broth is great, and while all these other things that we talk about, can be fantastic, it's like it doesn't replace water. And so we need to be drinking water. I do education too about how we need to filter our water, and our tap water has a lot of um, compounds in it that we don't realize, and that could be glyphosate, it could be pharmaceutical metabolites from people flushing their pharmaceutical drugs down the toilet. It can be, obviously, they're treating it with chlorine to kill the bacteria. There's fluoride in the water. Not every place is fluorinated, but there's a great resource for people that want to figure out what's actually in my water and do I actually need to care and maybe filter my water, instead of me trying to persuade them through like a podcast, or which I could talk about, but it's like you can just go to the environmental working group. They have a tap water database that is amazing. You can type in your zip code and it will tell you everything that has been reported and found in the water. And then they even give you resources in terms of water filters, both for like hand pitchers as well as like countertop, or ones that you are more expensive you can actually install. And it is based on your budget. So it's budget friendly. You can figure out what works for you and works for your family, because it shouldn't break the bank to do that. But it is a great investment. It really, if you're trying to invest in your health. So drink water. A lot of times people, they may be fatigued, they may be tired, they may have a headache, and simply it's just because they haven't drank enough water. So drink water. The next one too is about quality over quantity. So there's a lot of people that's, there's a lot, especially on Instagram, a lot of people that talk about if it fits your macros and calorie counting. And I just find that so stressful. I personally have never counted macros. The only time that I did was when I was strict vegan and I was an athlete and I had to make sure that I was getting enough protein, especially since the catabolic nature of my sports and trying to build my body back up. I was aiming for about 220 grams of protein every day from plant-based foods. I wasn't eating any meat.
Wow.
And so I was very diligent about that. And the funny thing is too, is I was eating a lot more whole grains and I was eating a lot more whole wheat because it did contain 6 grams of protein or so per serving. And a lot of that comes from the gluten protein. And then now we know too that there's so many people that are having issues with gluten. And little did I know at the time I had non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So I was literally fueling the fire when I thought I was doing better. So
I can relate, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So quality over quantity. And I truly believe that if you just focus on nutrient density, you're eating your vegetables, you don't need to count calories. And it's going to open up this whole new realm of food freedom that you've never realized, because I can see and I empathize with people that have to count every calorie, every macro meticulously.
Mhm.
That is so stressful. And how can you enjoy food? How can you go out and enjoy that communion with people? Because I know people that have been in that place before and they can't eat out because they don't have control of what they're putting in the food and the macros and the calories. And it's more fearful for them to not have control of that and to potentially gain weight than it is to enjoy that food with another person in their presence. And so, if you just focus on eating whole foods, you really don't have to count calories. You can use it as a tool for sure. I really believe it's a short-term tool. And then once you start to figure out what works for you, you can really let that go. And I think that's a really powerful one. And I think that segues too into the next aspect in terms of quality over quantity. And that's if you choose to eat animal products, choose animals that have been raised in more natural conditions in a way, treated more humanely. And that is more pasture raised, wild fish, eggs, beef, whatever it is that you eat. But, really focusing on that. I mean, organic is a step up for sure. But just because it's organic chicken breast doesn't mean it's the best. And so I have shared, at least for eggs, a hierarchy of what all of the food labeling means and marketing tactics in terms of like what to watch out for and what they mean so that you can be an informed shopper and decipher all of that jargon. But yeah, you could have organic chicken breasts, and while it's better than conventional, they could still be being fed organic soy and organic corn, which are two monoculture crops that are grown heavily here in the United States. And 60%, I think it's 66%, so 2/3 of the corn and soy grown in the United States is given to feed livestock here in the United States. So a lot of that is, it's being grain-fed, grain-rich diets to these animals, which is not a natural diet, and it's going to increase the amount of pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids and decrease the amount of anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids. I do want to say that with a caveat, and I see this all over Instagram, and it's something that I've been trying to speak up about, is that sure, we talk about omega-6s being more inflammatory and omega-3s being anti-inflammatory, and two reasons why is those omega-6 fatty acids are going to typically contain more arachidonic acid, so the precursor, which is more inflammatory, found in animal-based products, and then versus omega-3 fatty acids, which will lead to resolvins, which are anti-inflammatory. So if you're thinking about the science of it, why? But also there's this important aspect of ratios. So, is it really that omega-6s are that inflammatory, or is it so inflammatory, or it's inflammatory because we're consuming so many more omega-6s compared to omega-3s? And so you got to think about the whole environment and the whole person. And is it somebody that is eating a lot of processed foods, which is where you get a lot of those more inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids because they're coming from vegetable oils. So if you're eating a very heavily processed diet with a lot of vegetable oils, you're going to get more omega-6s and you're getting less omega-3s. You can also, I love to make this analogy that omega-6s and omega-3s, it's like a game of musical chairs. The more seats, that are, so like if you have omega-6 at the party and they're occupying all the seats, omega-3 can't come in and sit and play. So you could, be eating a processed rich diet and then trying to supplement with fish oil. But if you still have high saturation omega-6, it's not going to really do any good because you don't have any spots for omega-3 to come and join the party. And so you need to simultaneously decrease your omega-6 fatty acids, increase those heart healthy and anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids. And sure, you can supplement, but you're not going to beat whole foods first. And so you're going to get those omega-3 fatty acids from two different sources. You have your EPA and DHA long chain omega-3 fatty acids, which you'll find in cold water oily fish, such as sardines, herring, trouts, salmon, and
anchovies, mackerel,
anchovies, all of them. Yep. And then algae, the marine sources. And then you'll have your short chain ALA, alpha linoleic acid, omega-3 fatty acids. And those are the ones you find in hemp seeds and chia seeds and flax seeds and walnuts. And those are the plant-based ones. And so there is that nuance of, if you're eating a strict vegan diet and you're not eating any of those long chain omega-3 fatty acids, how much are you actually getting from the ALA precursor? And so not to go too much into the biochemistry, but, algae is important to supplement, I believe, on a vegan diet. So there are companies out there, and that's going to provide a source of EPA. And so, those long chain fatty acids are really important, but people that are worried if they are getting enough can do a omega saturation test to see where their omega-6 and omega-3 levels fall. So that is something that a healthcare practitioner can look at. And so that's where it's like, people are going to argue, but it's like, let's test, not guess.
Yeah.
That is. So that was the aspect on quality. And then, getting back in the kitchen, I really believe that, why is it that we don't learn, home economics anymore in school and stuff like that? I always joke, it's like, I learn about photosynthesis and all this stuff, standard in school and middle school and high school, but we don't know how to balance a checkbook. We don't know how to do our taxes. We don't know how to invest in our future. I'm learning all these things as an entrepreneur right now. And I'm like, it's so overwhelming. And I got to hire a team because it's like, I could take the time, but it takes a lot of time. And I'm already trying to balance so many things. So it's like, these are such useful tools that I wish I knew. And is that because our society deems that they're not helpful? Or is it a way to kind of keep us from getting into these fields in a way? Is it a way to regulate is my thought process sometimes. And so when it comes to food, are we trying to keep, the consumption of our food in the hands of other people in terms of always going out to eat and big food and those that process food? Or because that's a huge thing. And so if you take people's knowledge away on how to prepare food, well, then they depend on the system. And so I think by learning how to cook, it's the best investment in yourself you could possibly make, because not only can you eat more nourishing foods, but you have ultimate control. You have complete control of what you're actually putting in your body, the oils you're choosing, the organics, the additives, the spices, whatever it may be. And so that's something that I think is so important. You can teach people everything and they can have that knowledge, but if they still don't have the culinary skills and the kitchen skills of how to prepare that in the kitchen, it's going to keep them, hold them back from actually taking action. And that's what I'm realizing, even putting those recipes online, even providing that information, people still want to be spoon-fed and they need the basics. They need the videos. And that's something that I'm trying to get into next, is just people need that. And so if you can cook from home, that's going to be such a big thing because you're going to then have that control. But, the other important thing too, I think, is cooking good food and nourishing food does not have to taste bad too, because I remember when I first started this journey and when I started my page, it was like, well, I thought of like eating vegan, or what people think of like a vegan diet. They think of like a block of tofu. They think of like
Yeah.
and iceberg lettuce kind of thing. They think of like, almonds. They think of just like very bland foods, but it does not have to be that way. You can make it very nourishing. You can make it taste amazing and even better than its, conventional part. I'm thinking about like macaroni and cheese or brownies or cookies. Like people will ask, do you crave anything? And I'm honestly like, honestly, no, I don't crave anything because I have found a way to make what that is that I enjoy in a healthier way. Less refined, more nutrient dense, whatever that may be. And so it's just taking the time and investing that time in you. And
Tyler, like people are probably listening and they're like, yeah, I know, but I don't have time.
yeah.
What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that if something means enough to you, you'll find a way to make it work. And I learned that through my time as an athlete that, if it's important enough to you, you'll find a way and you will reprioritize your priorities, because everybody has priorities in life. And if there's something that you're continuously not getting to, even though you keep telling yourself you're going to get to it, don't kid yourself. Don't lie to yourself. It's not that you don't have the time. It's just not a priority for you, because there's plenty of other things you're prioritizing your time to. So it's just being honest with yourself and reprioritizing your priorities. That's fine if it's not a priority for you. No shame in that. But, I truly believe that your health should be your most important priority. And that starts with food. As you know, like food creates the foundations for health, which I was talking about earlier and you mentioned in my bio. And if you do not have your health, you do not have life. I'll repeat that. If you do not have your health, you do not have life. Whatever it is that inspires you, that drives you, that gives you passion, that zest for life, whether that be to travel, to help people, whatever it
Your
may be.
family, success.
If you don't have your health first, none of that matters. So
That's going to be your quote for for Thursdays.
All the t-shirts we're making for Tyler are going to say, if you don't have health, you don't have life.
It's so important because people, it's easy for people to think that health and wellness is exclusive. It's elitist. It's a cult in a way. I've heard all these different things, and it's like, no, it's not. Your health is so important. And, when you think about what creates health and what determines health, most all of those factors are free. But so many of us just do not make those things a priority and are too invested in our social life or our work life. And there's not enough balance in these other aspects. And so you got to make sure to recharge yourself. And there's only so much that an influencer or a physician or a mentor can do to, empower you to make that shift, because it's a big shift. And I acknowledge that. And it can be very daunting and uncomfortable because it's a lot of change. But, looking back on, from my perspective of making that change and how the uncomfortableness and, how I went from this one extreme to the other and how much I've grown through this process, I empathize with people and I see them. And it's like, I wish there's a way that I could streamline that information on how I did it. But the reality is, and the truth is, it's so different for every person, and how I went about it could be completely different than another person. So that's where it's hard. You can equip people with that knowledge and why they should do it, but ultimately they have to kind of embark on this journey on their own in a way, and then find that support system too that is going to support them so that they can be successful with that. So I know we went on a tangent, but
no, it's okay. I mean, as a coach and as a dietitian, we work with people on those like at-home behavior changes, like how to implement that in your schedule. And it is, it's very specific to a person's lifestyle and their family circumstances and their job and their schedule. And so we understand what it's like not to have time. I mean, Tyler literally is in school all the time, and he somehow is still cooking his own food, posting constantly. And Tyler and I and Jessica all still eat out too. We're not like, totally unrelatable people. I mean, we still are just like you in a lot of ways. So just to throw that out there, right?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And, so a lot of people ask, how do I do it all? Like, it's literally the most common question I get is, and it's hard for me to relate that, and I can share my experience, but I know it's not relatable for everybody. And I really credit being a student athlete and being an athlete in general for really just instilling this work ethic and time management. It's so invaluable. And it's something that I really, truly believe you can't really teach, but it's something that's instilled in you by going through just the process, by really pursuing something that you're passionate about. And so it really just taught me more life skills than I ever expected, and allows me to check in with myself and reprioritize whatever those things are. And, I'm constantly in flux, and I am changing those priorities depending on what is most important at that time. And so, the other thing that I've just remembered, that I've realized through this whole process, though, is that if I am not well and I am not taking care of myself, I'm talking about, self-care that everyone's talking about. Mm-hmm. I am not able to do everything that I set out to do and that I want to do. And I can't be there present for school, and I'm not able to obtain and grasp all that knowledge that's being thrown at me. So, creating that time for me is actually, sleep, exercise is more important, and it is more important priority than it is school. And people would think like, that's crazy. You get rid of those things that are the variables and you don't have to do, and you just focus on the one thing. But I will tell you that without self-care, school would be absolutely miserable. And there are times that I still feel like I'm drowning. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I always have to get back to what I know to be true, and that is taking care of me and carving out time for me, whether that's reading a book, listening to a podcast outside of school, even because there's other things that interest me, whether that's yoga, exercising, being in bed by 9:30. There's a lot of sacrifice that goes with it. And I think that's another reality too, that people have a hard time kind of swallowing, because there's a lot of things that maybe you enjoy and you don't want to sacrifice those things. And so a lot of people will never make that leap. And so I think it does come back to is finding that tribe and those people that support you, so that you can really be on that path for exponential growth. And I really believe it's a journey. It's not an overnight fix. It's not a quick step. And I'm sure, the clients that you work with, it's a process, and it's the little wins, and it's like finding out where to start, because it can be so overwhelming. And so I think it's just giving people that encouragement that you can absolutely do it. It's not an overnight success, and that we want to give you the tools so that you can be as successful as possible.
Wow. Thank you. I mean, I want to let you go through your whole list for sure, but we have been going for almost an hour already, because we haven't even scratched the surface of all the things that Tyler can teach us.
We could talk for another 2 hours.
I do want people to understand that you weren't just born a superhero. You really have been through quite a few things that may have slowed you down. In some of your posts, you mentioned you struggled with anxiety and what seemed like an ADHD brain. You had other things going on with you, right? Can you tell us?
Disease, or you stay away from gluten now too.
Yeah. So that's where I think that food truly is the foundation, and food can be healing, and food can be medicine. And I heard about that, and I never truly realized it until it happened to me, so to say. And I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder in 7th grade. I was diagnosed with ADHD going into college. I was always that individual that needed extra time on all my exams, and I would typically not finish 80 of my exams. I would just simply run out of time. And I always thought I had this processing delay, even though I was diagnosed with ADHD. I was like, that doesn't fit what I think I had, but diagnostically, that's what it was. But I was like, you know what? It feels like a processing delay. It just takes me a while to really think about it, put it together, and then put that pen to paper kind of thing. Long story short, when I embarked on this journey, and started seeing a naturopathic physician, I found out that I had non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So I will say that non-celiac gluten sensitivity is not an allergy. It is it's an IgG mediated response. So it's a delayed response that is not allergy based, but it is inflammatory based. And so it's a food hypersensitivity, and not to be, again, confused with a food allergy. Like people have an allergy to peanuts. That's typically an IgE mediated response, and that's immediately. So people that, for example, the people that say I go into anaphylactic shock, hives, throat starts to swell up when I eat peanuts, that's an IgE response. IgG is more subtle. That's what I have. It's a hypersensitivity to a food. It could be to any food because every person's different, but non-celiac gluten sensitivity is a more common one. It's not celiac disease. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disease, but it does have an inflammatory component. But what I realized when I ultimately did an elimination diet where I eliminated gluten and all wheat containing products from my diet for a month under direction of my naturopathic doctor, I felt significantly better within a matter of 3 days. And so typically for an IgG response, it kind of trickles around for 72 hours. And it's around for 72 hours. So when I actually removed those foods, all of a sudden I had so much more clarity in terms of the thinking process. I was so much more calm. I wasn't as anxious.
Wow.
And I felt like a completely different person. And I was just like, what is going on? I stuck with it. I felt great. And then I was so looking forward to that pasta when I was done with this because, whole wheat
The
pasta
month,
right?
when the
Yeah.
month was up, oh my gosh.
And I sat down to a large plate of pasta, and I had never had what I would call an anxiety or panic attack or anxiety attack before. That next day, I had a full-on anxiety attack and panic attack. On my doctor, I thought that I was going to pass out. My heart was going to give out, and I was like, "What is wrong?" I had no clue. And so I tried this again a couple times. It's kind of like an N-1 experience. And after talking with my doctor, this was a compound that was so inflammatory to me. And the way that it worked is basically, if you think about it, whenever it was consuming gluten, it was causing gut inflammation, and that gut inflammation was relaying up to the brain because there's a connection between your gut and your brain. There's a gut-brain axis. It was resulting in brain inflammation. And so I perpetually had this chronic brain inflammation from the foods that I was eating, and it was resulting in fatigue and anxiety and depression and what they called ADHD, or more of just that inability to think clearly. I depended on coffee during my college years, and in high school, I depended on Vyvanse and Adderall. So I was all cracked out on amphetamines every day just to feel normal. I took lorazepam, which is a GABA agonist, so it helps calm the body down, GABA being a calming neurotransmitter. So I tried all these things, and I actually hated the way these medications made me feel, but I took them because I needed something for the relief. But as soon as I found that food could be that profound, I just kept gluten out of my diet, and that made a world of difference to me. And so I started to look at more of the research and stuff like that with ADHD and anxiety. And there are studies that are showing, again, there's smaller studies, they're anywhere from 50 people, 100 people, 200 people. And so I think there are bigger studies that need to be warranted, but they were randomized controlled trials. And those that followed a elimination diet saw significant improvement in their ADHD symptoms or anxiety symptoms. And so there definitely is, a link that is backed in the literature. And so again, it's going to be different for every person, but I think it's another reason why just, when you get away from processed foods too, you're removing a lot of those components as well, and the food additives. And, let's be honest, wheat is in everything too. So for me, it almost made it easier to move away from processed foods because everything had wheat in it. And so people will ask, like, you don't cheat on it, like that kind of thing, like cheat meals and stuff like that. I was like, honestly, no, because it makes me feel so bad. It's not worth it. And I can find so many other alternatives that are gluten-free, even if it is, not great ingredients. And it's like potato starch and tapioca flour and stuff like that, which I really wouldn't eat. But like, that any of that is better than literally eating gluten. So yes, food can be very healing and very medicinal. But I think one of the most important things that somebody can start to learn and tune into is how their body is reacting to their environment and foods that they're eating. Listening to their body, not ignoring those cues, and trying to be more of a detective, because you know you best. And so if you were to go into your doctor and you're talking about all these symptoms, there's a lot of information you can really provide them if you start tuning into those cues that your body's giving you.
Tyler, I just wanted to know your opinion, because some people are really resistant to doing an elimination diet, especially when it's like gluten or dairy. So in your opinion, like, my advice is typically to someone to try for just 2 weeks, because I feel like it's so doable. Just try giving up gluten for 2 weeks and just see if you feel better. But you mentioned the IgG, and it makes me think, gosh, there's so much IgG testing out there. They can probably get that from their regular primary care doctor, right? Which do you think is the quickest, easiest route to go?
Yeah, so IgG isn't probably, so when you go and see your primary care doctor, especially like an MD or a DO or a PA, nurse practitioner, they mostly know about or will run an IgE panel. So that's a food allergy panel. An allergist would run an IgE test. Again, that's different than IgG, because you could have no IgE responses, but you can have an IgG response. And again, the IgG is a food hypersensitivity. So it's a sensitivity, not specifically an allergy. And so, yes, you can do an IgG test. A lot of the tests are an ELISA blot, which is a type of immuno assay that people will run. And it's like you poke your finger, get some blood, drop it on a card, and then you send that in and they'll do the results. You can do a panel and get like results from 94 different foods, and it will kind of tell you how sensitive you are to all these different foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, meats, grains, you name it. I would still say that a elimination diet is gold standard. It is. Okay. You can do an IgG test. It can give you a place to start, and you can use it as a tool to kind of figure out, maybe I should start with eliminating these, or like, okay, this is kind of more like confirmatory that there are some foods that maybe I'm reacting to, and I should start eliminating some foods just to see how I feel. But yeah, elimination diet is going to be gold standard, and working with a qualified healthcare professional while going through that, and not doing it more than a month, I would say, because you could, if you like remove a food for too long, you could again have one of those rebound effects like I did, because also too, when you remove certain foods too, your gut microbiome changes, and your gut microbiome can change within a matter of 24 hours. So food plays a role in how it influences our gut microbial terrain. So, there's going to be changes in, your gut microflora, and other immune components too, when you remove those foods. So, we learn about not removing those foods for more than a month when we are starting to tease out those things, and for them to keep a diary or a journal to kind of figure out, do I feel better? Do I feel worse? Do I feel more anxious? Do I feel like I'm have reactions in whatever way possible? There's so many different ways that it can manifest.
Wow.
But yeah, typically though, it's 3 days that it would take. So like, I know for me, if I'm ever exposed to gluten or wheat, I won't react the same day. I'll react the day after, and it will last for about 3 days, and then I'll feel better again. And so that's where I'll feel really anxious. And it's very much a dose dependent response too, depending on how much wheat I was exposed to. I'm pretty good about it, but whenever I eat out and it's like, oh, they used some soy sauce, or it was in the shared fryer thing, like it will be like very like low grade anxiety. It won't be like severe, but like I know that if I were to like decide like, screw it, I'm gonna have a whole plate of pasta, like that would not go well for me.
Oh my gosh, no, you must be scared away from that ever since that happened. Wow.
Yeah, but there's so many other options now in the market with like organic lentil pasta and chickpea pasta and mung bean pasta. There's all these different things now. So yeah, and so that's where it's like, you have to be really adapt and in tune with your body to kind of figure out what is it that works for you and what doesn't. And I think like, figuring out, again, like what works for you and what doesn't. And that's kind of that trial and error that everybody has to go through, which is not necessarily what someone wants to hear. They want you to tell them exactly what it is that they need to remove, but it's not the case. Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing your story and just all of your information with us. And we want all of our listeners to make sure that they follow you, functional.foods, on Instagram, because you are so inspirational and you share so much knowledge that we could honestly keep chatting for forever.
I know. And if you guys are looking for the post that we're referring to, and you want to see the rest of the list of his personal food guidelines, we are going to link to those in the show notes. And the show notes are found on any app just by scrolling up while you're listening to the podcast player. So share this with somebody that you know, and anybody that cares about cooking for their family or proper nutrition, or is wondering if they should go vegan. I mean, this is great information, and his page is so awesome because he really is not choosing sides, and it gives you permission to just explore all whole foods with equal appreciation. And I think that's so important. Jessica and I both eat plant-centered diets, even though I'm paleo and primal. And on my page, you'll often see pictures of meat all the time because I know it makes a badass post. But it's like crazy how many salads make up my entire diet. And like Tyler was saying, your gut changes. So if you don't like salads and vegetables now, slowly over time, as you're introducing these new foods, you will find that you're craving them more, and you come over to our side, and then all of a sudden you like eating salads every day. Right, Tyler?
Yeah. I mean, I would even throw in that nuance, though, that for some people, they don't have the digestive strength to break
the raw
salad foods and the raw foods. So they need to start even with cooked foods. Yeah. And that could be a difference because they have a salad for lunch and they feel fatigued 45 minutes later because all of that blood is getting shunted to the digestive tract to actually break down that food, because it's hard for them to break it down. And then, yeah, they'll get bloated because they can't break it down.
All right, well, name your favorite cooked vegetable and then tell everyone any last words you want to say, and then we're signing off.
All right. I would say it's Brussels sprouts, which is funny because I used to hate Brussels sprouts, but I think, you got to prepare them right. I mean, steamed Brussels sprouts, I would not touch, but even though I know that steamed is the best in terms of nutritional bioavailability, I roast my Brussels sprouts and I'll just do 400 degrees for 20 minutes kind of thing. That is oil? I use avocado oil for that. And so I would say avocado oil and ghee are my two go-tos that I like to use. I like to do
roasting too,
stovetop, with the ghee, but and then olive oil too. I'll even use at times. And so, Brussels sprouts. They're probably my meal prep every single week. And what was the second question?
Just anything you want to leave everyone with as we say goodbye.
Yeah. You can find me on functional.foods. Also my website, eatfunctionalfoods.org. More exciting things to come. I have a book coming out.
That's so exciting.
And this is going to be a food user's manual. So it's everything that I wish I had when I started my food journey. And it's going to tease out all of the intricacies of every single thing that people want that information for. So we're going to be talking about macros. We're going to be talking about the micros. We're going to be talking about functional foods and what are functional foods and what are their benefits. We're going to be talking about food synergy, how to build a balanced plate. We're going to talk about all the hot topics in nutrition today and tease out and break down all these myths from, is saturated fats going to cause cardiovascular disease? Is dietary cholesterol bad for you? Is meat going to cause cancer? Is gluten-free the best thing for everybody? We're going to talk about so many things, and we're even going to tease out the different nuances on like lectin diets, low oxalate diets, low histamine diets. We're going to talk about paleo format that, you have this reference in this pocket guide that is going to be your surefire resource whenever you need to look up that information and see if it's right for you. And I really hope it is this empowering tool where it is that aspect of informed consent, where you have that knowledge and then you can make that decision what's best for you. And there's also going to be recipes included with it to really build on those principles that I'm going to be sharing in that book and how to make tasty, nourishing food. So,
well, congratulations on that.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm in awe that you're even doing that because of how busy you are. So that's amazing.
Sounds so comprehensive. We're going to have to give one away to our podcast listeners. Keep us in the loop for that pre-order, man. We're on board.
Yes, absolutely.
Good luck to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tyler.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.